So now we're going to move on to a spotlight session. So spotlight sessions was something that we introduced last year. They are short, high-impact sessions where we look to share ideas and innovations around how we can stop modern slavery. Last year we covered everything from data, blockchain, artificial intelligence, digital identity, and machine learning. And today we've got some other spotlights that are going to look at some of those themes, but also just generate some new ideas and some new thinking about things that you can do. So I'm thrilled that we welcome the very inspirational Matt Friedman to do the opening spotlight session today. Matt is the CEO of the Mekong Club, who needs very little introduction for anyone who's here in the room for Hong Kong. We were thrilled, obviously, to host the Bankers Alliance with the Mekong Club earlier. And also this year we helped amplify some of the slavery training that the Mekong Club has been doing with adding it to our online platform so that companies could roll that out. In a survey that we had done recently at Thomson Reuters, it showed that there was only about 50% of companies said that they fully train or educate their staff, their customers, their third-party vendors, and so we think collaboration such as that one is a very important one to really, step up the agenda on how we can educate and change. So please welcome me in welcoming Matt to the stage.
I was told if there's an awkward pause at the beginning, it creates a certain amount of anticipation. And that's what I'm going for here. Okay, I want to begin by thanking the organizers for an opportunity to be here today. The name of my talk is Private Sector's Response to Modern Slavery and Landing a Man on the Moon. Wow, what relevance do these two things have? Okay, so I think the relevance is this. I'll start with a story. This is NASA in 1959. NASA at that time really didn't have a sense of identity. They just knew that they needed to get rockets up in the air to catch up with the Soviet Union. There was really no plan, there wasn't a really strong direction. They had a good idea, but they didn't really know what they were going to do with it until President Kennedy came along. And President Kennedy in 1961 in a speech said, the U.S. should commit itself to achieving the goal before the end of this decade of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely. Talk about a goal. Talk about a plan. What it did is it united all of the scientists and the engineers and the technicians in a way that they all knew they were moving in a particular direction. Now, when a lot of people heard this suggestion, a lot of them thought it was hugely ambitious, potentially unrealistic, and very idealistic. And it absolutely was. But imagine human beings going all the way up to the moon. What an amazing goal. Okay, and so what did they do? They basically focused on the essential things that needed to be done because they needed to do it in a very short period of time. So they had to figure out, how big is the rocket? How big does the payload need to be? How does the spacesuit accommodate offering a safe place for a person to be in space? What are the calculations that need to be done in order to do the rotation around the moon and so forth? What does the capsule need to have in place? And as a result of everybody coming together, focusing on this grandiose outcome, it was done. In 1969, Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. And subsequent to that, other people ended up going to the moon. A goal was set. It was a grandiose goal. People came together, they worked together, they solved the problems, and at the end of this, we made it to the moon. Okay, let's segue to human trafficking. Modern slavery, forced labor, whatever we want to call it. We've heard that there's over 40 million people in modern slavery. One of the statistics that is extremely important about this, though, is that with all of the UN, NGO, and government organizations combined coming together, the world helps less than 1%. Actually, it's closer to 0.5%. Okay, if you want to split hairs, it's 0.2%. We know that many of these slaves are associated with supply chains. We know that many of these slaves are associated with financial systems. We know that the private sector needs to be involved in addressing this. And they are. Let's give credit to the fact that there are organizations that are doing things, and they have been for some time. Okay, but what we hear as an organization that works with the private sector is that many of these companies have challenges. And we hear these challenges described over and over again. And I'm sure many of you in this room have heard the same things. There's limited resources within the company to focus on this. We're really not sure how to go about doing this. There's not a lot of incentive from the leadership to kind of move forward to address this. A lot of people don't understand it. And I know this because I present to a lot of people. Limited data sharing among organizations, limited community. And there's also a sense of, well, what do we do if we find it? A lot of organizations don't really know what to do with that. Okay, but the one thing that comes up more than anything else when we talk to the private sector in listening to their response related to this is they say that, well, if we respond to this, we have to use a certain amount of time from our people. We have to expend a certain amount of money. Is it going to affect the profitability of our organization? And this often becomes the point at which when we are talking to private companies, it kind of stops the conversation because we don't always have an answer. Okay, so I'm going to pose a couple of questions here. The first question is, what would a similar goal be for the private sector in addressing modern slavery? The equivalent of the private sector moon goal. I'm not talking about just a simple goal. I'm talking about that big one out there, going all the way to the moon. But to have the private sector to have something as big and as important, as relevant as that. But we have to also make sure that we have something that is very ambitious, but not impossible. Okay, another question is, something that could free millions of people from exploitative labor practices while not forcing business to choose between what is right, what is sustainable, and what is profitable. Let me say that again. While not forcing businesses to choose between what is right, what is sustainable, and what is profitable. Okay, so let me offer that goal. Let me give you a suggestion of what that might look like. And here it is. The private sector will eliminate forced labor from its supply chains by 2028 without a negative impact on profitability. Now, in the past, we often say, go out and reduce and eliminate forced labor, but we don't include that profitability element in there, so we lose a lot of our audience. We have to build it into the solution so that the private sector understands that we understand their concern. But there has to be a time element to it as well. And perhaps 2028, maybe that's too soon. That's 10 years from now. Maybe it should be 2038 or 2048. It doesn't matter. I'm going to use 2028 simply because I really want this to happen very quickly. When you look at this, you might think it's hugely ambitious, potentially unrealistic, and very idealistic. And perhaps it is. But we have to think big. We have to think about the fact that there are all of these people out there suffering every single day. At what point do we ask ourselves whose responsibility is to address this, And what can we do to make this happen? Okay, so if we're going to achieve this goal, what do we need to do? Well, the first thing we need to do is to focus on the essentials. When the moon launch was done, they didn't have time to go off and focus on all different things. They focused on what was essential, what needed to be addressed, so they could just get on with the work. So we need to define what works and what's efficient. We need to identify how to bring the community together, because that's an essential part. We need to share data. That's essential. We need to look at recruitment practices, because we know that a lot of forced labor happens associated with those types of things. We need to understand the regulations and the responses. All of these things are essential. Okay, but in order to get to a point where we can achieve that type of goal, we need a plan. So what are the components that need to be in place for this plan to work? Well, I think there are 7 of them. The first one is education and capacity building. How many of you in this room feel like you know enough about this issue right now? Raise your hand. Oh, I see Adidas knows. Okay, an award winner right there. Most of us don't have the information we need. Now, the information is available, and if we standardized it and we made it available in such a way that we were able to, for the most part, get the same message to all of the companies, wouldn't we be further along? Perhaps next year, if I come back and I ask the same question, we'll see more hands. It's cost effective if it's done in a systematic, standardized way. Second, multi-stakeholder communities. A lot of private companies are doing things by themselves. They feel like they have to do it themselves. But imagine if we could get companies together, like the Bali process that we just heard. Or in the case of the Mekong Club, we bring stakeholder groups together all the time in banking, in retail, and manufacturing. We know that when you get a group of organizations together, when they work together, you have breakthroughs. But we also feel that perhaps there should be a focal person within a company. Somebody who knows a little bit more than everybody else, doesn't have to be an expert, but knows where to go if in fact there's a question. Uniform tools and techniques. There's about 30 or 40 tools that are already out there. What if we were to identify the ones that were most efficient and effective, put a lot of emphasis on standardizing and getting it across to everyone? Let's get on with it. Let's reduce that vulnerability. Let's find where those forced labor people are. But at the same time, once we find them, we need to know what to do. There's a lot of companies that are fearful of the day they find that forced labor case, because even though they have some kind of a plan in writing, they don't really know what they're going to do. We have to have that tough discussion. We have to kind of talk to the business world. We have to get them to come to some solutions, some suggestions, some protocols, so that we know as we get into this what we have to achieve. We need consistent data. How many companies would work with the assumption of making some kind of impact without having all kinds of data? How can we expect to be able to have breakthroughs unless we're able to consolidate, analyze, and use data in a way that allows us to be able to address the issue? It's an essential part of the process. We need collaboration among the NGOs, the legal world, and the private sector. Now, in the past, the NGO world is over here, and the legal world is over here, and the private sector is over here. They haven't really trusted each other. That's changing. There are a lot of organizations that basically are working with private sector in a positive, supportive way. We need to encourage that. If you take this and you put it out there as a big goal, you need a plan. Now, when I worked in the HIV/AIDS sector, we had a situation where from the highest level, global level, regional level, country level, city level, community level, everyone knew there was some kind of a plan. Why don't we have that in the human trafficking world? We don't have it on the public side, we don't have it on the private side. What I'm suggesting is that we need to look in the direction of where we want to go. And we won't know if we've gotten there unless we plan it out. We need to have a vision. It needs to be a big vision. It needs to be motivated by the fact that there's a lot of people who are suffering out there that need our help. We need a name for it. If it was me, I would call it the Freedom Manifesto for Business. I just like the name Manifesto. See, it sounds cool. I don't know what you call it. It doesn't matter. But there's all of these organizations here. Many of them have a stake in this. Many of them are striving to figure out how to do this. We need to unite us together. But let's have a goal. Let's have a direction. Let's make it as big as the walk on the moon, and let's just get on with it. Because there's 40 million people out there. We're helping less than 0.2%. It's really important. Thank you very much.